Thank you very much, above all, for those who stayed from the last session. We're really excited about doing the ethical side of AI now. We have a great panel for you, and we're going to touch upon subjects like liability and trust and the ethical design, effectively, but interestingly as well, things like consciousness. So one of the things that we wanted to do before we start is really prep you for the conversation. And so I have the pleasure to introduce you to Tony Fish, who's going to go through a few concepts to make sure that you're all very well equipped for the conversation we're going to have next.
I lecture in AI, and the reason I lecture and not teach is I don't understand it. Up there, you'll see rule-based. So the first thing we look at is rule-based decision-making, where we give you yes-no data. And out of yes-no data, you can make a decision. And some of those decisions could be very simple modeling of patterns. From rule-based learning, we move to statistical analysis. And statistical analysis is where we put numerical numbers into a database and then into an algorithm, and we can do predictive modeling from that. The next level up from that is this idea of machine learning, which we've heard an awful lot about. And machine learning is where you take arbitrary data, and what you do is you abstract it to a number, because it has to be a number. And from that, you can then do an analysis. And that analysis allows the identification of features. Then we hit this last block at the end, which everyone talks about as artificial intelligence. And basically, at this point, you're now selecting a particular method to work out what's happening. And from that, you can present information. But you've got to have arbitrary data and the selection of a method. And this is why autonomous vehicles don't use one algorithm. They use all of the ones above and many more. So an AI, as we move on, under it is this idea of deep learning. And deep learning is this last sort of piece behind me. And the purpose of deep learning is it has an input and an output. And at the level 1, what we do is we look very, very simply for the edges. And after we've looked for the edges of an image, we look for corners. And after corners, we look for distinctive patterns. And out of that, we can work out something. And you have to go through deep learning, which is a number of algorithms which work on top of each other. So deep learning is the foundation of machine learning. Machine learning allows us to reach artificial intelligence.
Recently, we were named by the World Economic Forum as tech pioneers, and with that kind of work, we've been actually looking at a lot of the context around the fourth industrial revolution and asking ourselves, really, as a tech company, what is really our responsibility when it comes to the ethics of what we're bringing into the industry? So that's for me as to why I'm passionate about the subject, and I'm very excited to have this wonderful panel. We did preps yesterday, and it's going to be fantastic, I can guarantee it. You know quite a lot about the topic, so if you had to prioritize between good data and a complex algorithm, how would you look at it? What would you decide?
Well, you always have to start from the root of the problems. And here I'd like to quote Gela Bošković, who completely said it, that the only policy which would protect us against, our insurance policy to protect us against biases, is to have a diverse team, not only at the point of curating the data, as the previous speaker mentioned earlier, but also to monitoring how the data is being used and how the algorithm has been built. So when it comes to, I'd like to reinforce the fact that diversity of teams, it's one sure way to make sure that this bias is reduced, monitored, and eventually removed. There is obviously a huge opportunity when it comes to AI to rebuild trust in the industry, so to use that as a way to rebuild trust. And so, so what are your thoughts on that, Tony?
Thoughts on trust. One of the things as a society, we've got to work out, and when you go for beers afterwards, here's a couple of, just a thought experiment. So what type of AI world do you want which you're going to trust? So what the AI is doing, because it learns from images, it's looking through the images that are coming back from your phones, and it looks around, and a lot of people happen to be in Africa at the moment, and what it starts to learn is actually there's a drought. Okay, so it can see there's a drought. So does the AI turn around to local governments around the world and say, there's a drought in this country, we can see the drought, and actually, therefore, we should divert resources to solve the drought? Okay, that's one scenario. Second scenario is it looks at the world global patterns of climate change, and it recognizes in certain countries next year there will be a drought. And therefore, should it divert resources today to try and actually alleviate the drought before it occurs. At what point do you want these systems to intervene or alert you to these changes? Now, there's lots of different models, and the one thing we haven't had as a discussion around society is what model we want, and it depends on your model of trust. If we believe trust even exists, or it's just a way that we communicate an economic manipulation. And we've got to start breaking down the words to what we mean to society, not what it means to a business. The purpose of this is to debate and think. And if you go back to a macroeconomic level, okay, and this is slightly off the AI and ethics issue, which we need to come back to, but the reality is we're going through a change in the way that we work and how we work. And government, with regulation, likes to keep large corporates because it's a really easy way of collecting tax. What the new generations are coming through, and we've already seen it with Uber and everybody else, is everybody's moving to a service-based economy. You won't have a job for life. You'll probably have 3 jobs at the same time, and you will use skills. And we've got to get used to new skills. We've got to get used to a new way of thinking. The idea of the corporate owning responsibility for its employees, it goes back to individuals. Kids are already coming through with some of these philosophies, and they are already going down a path of not wanting to own assets. So we're seeing some seriously big global changes, and the kids are asking about the ethics. And they're looking on the door, and what they do is they look at the purpose of companies, and this is why AI and ethics comes into it, because what they want to see is this company doing things with my data or anybody's data that I don't like? I won't work for that company. And people are starting to make judgments, and I'd like to pick up on your issue of personalization, because personalization that you see today is based on a bunch of data of transaction. What really gets interesting is where you start to add your social data in, and your interactive data, and your group data. Because suddenly I don't understand if you're an A person who sits in a nice house, you're married with 2 kids, which is the old way of profiling. I see your propensity to spend money in certain situations. I see your ability to trust your friends or lend to your friends. I see your ideology about investment in the future or spending today. Those issues are how you emotionally behave. When we look at personalization in the future, I'm going to start to appeal to your emotions. Now, is that right? Should we use those nudged-based economics? What happens if I nudge you into the wrong thinking? Who owns the responsibility? And this is where the ethicals are not getting debated. We're not thinking, actually, this is a system, and I can manipulate you to do something because that's what the algorithm has been trained to do. Do you want to be in that world, or do you want to be influencing that world to make sure at least we have transparency?
What do we do with the workforce that's going to be redundant in the not too distant future?
I could have a long conversation with Tony, but I'll come back to the question.
No, there is the networking drinks afterwards. You're all welcome to come and argue with Tony.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Bring lots of beer. So, look, I think I go back to the statement I made at the very beginning. 20 years ago, we were going through exactly this process with the internet. We were all sitting there going, what are we going to do with all the people who aren't going to deliver letters anymore? Well, we still have a postal service. They just deliver everything from Amazon. So, it's...
Yes, but then should something be regulated to prevent the short-term hit that we're talking about?
Look, I'm no regulation expert when it comes to public policy, but I would say the reality of the profound nature of the change that's going to come means that any regulation that's done in a proactive way is likely to be well-intentioned but completely miss the mark, frankly. Yeah. So we're going to have to ride it out like we ride everything out as a society, and you do it with the right intentions and the right understanding and the right approach in terms of making sure that people aren't left behind. But we go through these changes on a relatively regular basis. We've been through it with the invention of computers in the early 80s, with the internet, now AI. These generational shifts keep coming. They're not going to stop. This isn't the last one. It's not if we fix this, it's going to be fine. There's going to be something else. So, I've sat here through the quantum computing sessions yesterday. We're 5 to 10 years away from that revolutionizing things again. So these are just waves of technology that we deal with as human beings. We've dealt with it ever since, cars replaced horses on the streets of London 100 years ago. It's, and previous to when somebody invented the wheel, it doesn't really make any difference. It's just more tech. So,
but it's also a lot more people that will be affected.
It is a lot more people, but you could argue that the internet was probably a more profound change in society, and mass communication with mobile phones has had probably a much bigger impact on society than AI will in the short term. all of those things have changed the way that we work and that we approach life. So, it's just another one of those.
So the last part of the panel we wanted to be discussing is really about like what the future holds, right? And so the question here is like, how do we make sure that we bring back the human into the machine, right? So I'll start with you, Tony. What do you think are the important things to think about in the future to make sure that happens?
On one axis, we've got autonomy, okay, which is this axis. On this axis, we've got ethical sensitivity. So in the corner, down the bottom, you have no autonomy, you do nothing, you're stationary, and you have no moral sense, you have no ethical sense. Humanity wants to get to autonomous sensitivity. Basically, you have full moral autonomy. You're able to be one of us. You're part of society, and that's you've got to go in a path. When man first came to the earth, we kind of like went up on the autonomy, and we reached the autonomy scale with no ethics, and we started to kill people and everything else, and we reached full moral autonomy that way. And over time, we sort of came down and down and down. Now, we won't let our kids out until they're 11 or 12 or 7, until we've taught them the rights and wrongs. So we've taken them along the ethical sensitivity, then we give them freedom to become autonomous. Machines, we've already given them the autonomy. Okay? Now, as a society, we carry on saying, we're going to teach machines ethics. And the question we've got is, do we teach machines ethics? Or do the machines come down the same path we did, and they teach themselves their ethics? And so, as a society, we've got to go through a decision of the future if we want to tell machines what they're doing, or machines are going to learn themselves. Why the question? If we take our data and pop it into machines and let it learn from us, as a white middle-class male, hallelujah, I'm going to be really successful. All the data biases to me. Ladies, I'm sorry, you're probably going to lose out. And if you happen to be black or one of that, the reality is it's going to be really bad because the data sets are so biased. So if we take some of our data and put it into these systems, we're going to end up with the wrong outcomes. So we've got to go through a view of what our vision is of the future and how machines are going to learn.
I would like to close the panel with a very interesting question on consciousness. So if you take it, a few years forward, and that we were discussing with Dr. Go as well as to where we can end up with AI, do you think that AI should have rights? Tony, start.
Yes, 100%. And that's one longer conversation over a beer. The reason I believe it has to have rights is because we actually don't understand consciousness in ourselves. We don't understand gravity. We don't understand many things. There is a big reality. There's an effect in you working right now called homeostasis, which is the body keeping itself in a stable state. You would have heard the corks popping at the back, which kind of like sends a series of nerves into, look, it's the end of the panel and what's going to be happening next, and a bit of a discussion. What you don't realize is that some of the ways you will interact based on this has nothing to do with your consciousness. It has everything to do with chemistry.
We can't run experiments on the humanity and hope that things will turn out better, and in the process we'll see how consciousness operates in humans.
So AI should have rights, Richard?
Well, I'm going to bring it back to one really short point. I would say, if I go back far longer than I care, I wrote one of my final papers at university was on, could a computer be schizophrenic? I got a great mark for that. So I effectively argued that mental illness was possible because consciousness was a viable option. So yes. And I'd say I can prove it now because my iPhone has Tourette's. So there you go.
I'm hoping you guys all enjoyed the afternoon we just had between Dr. Go and the panel we've just been discussing. Very interesting topics, right? And I think one of the things that is really exciting with Cybos and the work that the Innotribe does is that you're really trying to hear here first the things that are going to be affecting our industry or already affecting our industry. So do you, as decision makers and people that have come to listen to us, do you realize fully what the impact of AI will have in your jobs. Do you want to be part of it? Do you want to embrace it? Do you embrace it already? Or is this something that you think we really need to be having a much closer look at when it comes to the ethics of it as well? It is a reality that you need to take, really an active involvement to make sure that you don't get displaced and that you are educated to make the most of your careers as well. So thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much to the panel. Please join me in thanking them for their time.